Hope had never arrived to Luna as mercy. It came disguised as labor, as numbers copied in the dark, as one more order obeyed while she mapped exits in her head and counted which men drank themselves dull before moonrise. In houses built on rank, girls like her were called ungrateful for wanting names instead of inventory marks. In courts obsessed with bloodlines, truth survived only when someone dragged it into daylight with shaking hands. She had learned that survival was less a virtue than a discipline. Hide what hurts, remember everything, and run only when the cost of staying becomes a kind of death. By late afternoon, the border market looked like a broken jaw stitched with canvas and rope. Half the stalls leaned at angles where old shelling had shattered stone foundations, and smoke from cheap coal braziers mixed with wet wool, horse sweat, and bruised apples. Luna moved through it with her chin lowered, forged servant papers tucked in her bodice, and a ledger wrapped in oilskin under her cloak, pressing against her ribs like a second heartbeat. The wool around her right wrist scratched where the old brand had blistered months ago and never healed cleanly. Every few steps, she felt the phantom grip of shackles, though the iron was gone. She had almost reached the grain scales when she heard the metal rhythm of mounted guards crossing cobblestone, not patrol pace, hunting pace. Black braid, gray cloak, a man called from horseback. Stop where you are. Estate property under warrant. Luna did not stop. She slipped between two women arguing over dried beans, ducked behind a butcher's wagon, and swallowed the urge to look back. If she ran openly, they would tackle her in the mud and drag her by the wrist wrap until the brand showed. If she stayed still, they would read the papers and find the wax seal wrong by a single crescent notch. She chose the narrow gap between stalls and cut through baskets of nettles, breath shallow, pulse climbing hard enough to blur the edges of her sight. Then she turned too quickly and struck someone full force. The woman she collided with did not fall. She stood straight despite her years, wrapped in dark velvet trimmed with winter fox, two attendants at her shoulders. Fine silver traced her temple braids. Her gaze landed on Luna's face, then dropped to the wrapped wrist, then lifted again. She inhaled once. The color drained from her cheeks. Around them, voices dropped from bargaining noise to a tight, curious hush. The noblewoman stepped back, lowered herself with measured grace, and bowed. Not a polite nod. Not courtesy. A full, unmistakable bow from one who had never bent for anyone outside the old moon crown line. Gasps broke in a wave. Someone near the cider stall whispered, "Ellawen Valewood." Luna froze, unable to move even when the guard shouted again. Ellawen stayed bowed a heartbeat longer, then rose and said, quiet enough for Luna and loud enough for those nearest, "Forgive the delay in my recognition." Recognition. The word struck like cold water. Luna had no answer, only a rising dread that swallowed even her fear of capture. The lead tax guard forced his horse through the crowd. "Lady Ellawen, step aside. This girl belongs to Thornmere Estate." Ellawen turned with the calm of someone born to command rooms twice this size. "No person belongs to an estate," the guard sneered. "Debt chattel statutes were restored after the Vale collapse. Papers are filed." Luna's fingers found the ledger under her cloak. If they took her now, the book vanished with her, and every orphan listed in its columns would stay a line item instead of a witness. You know what they do when they catch runaways. You know how quiet the cellar gets after. In her mind, the present snapped into harsh immediacy. She was standing in an open market with half the district watching. Her papers would fail. The ledger would be seized. If she handed it over and begged, they would call that confession. If she ran, they would call that guilt. If she fought, they would call it proof she was never meant to be human to them. There was no clean choice. There had never been a clean choice. But there was still one thing she could control. Who heard the truth first? Hold the ledger, Keep breathing. Make one ally before they dragged her under. Before she could decide whether Alowan counted as ally or trap, another rider entered the square from the western arch, followed by 3 men in travel leathers carrying grain contracts in wax tubes. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion. Tall, broad-shouldered, weather-worn, he looked less like a court alpha and more like a war captain who had forgotten sleep. Thin scars crossed his jaw and disappeared into his collar. When he turned, amber bled through the brown of his irises. Sebastian, Elowen said. The name moved through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Alpha of the ruined Vale, the one rebuilding from ash with too few wolves and too many graves. He took in the scene in a glance. Guards with warrant hooks, his mother standing between them and a servant girl, half the market braced for spectacle. His expression hardened. Why are my trade talks standing in the middle of an arrest? The guard pointed at Luna. Escape chattel. Harboring her is obstruction. Sebastian's gaze shifted to Luna, briefly unreadable, then to the wrapped wrist she had failed to hide. Who issued the warrant? Thornmere steward under council authority. His mouth tightened. Council authority did not include market seizures on my negotiation day. Authority includes what it needs to, the guard replied. The memory hit Luna so sharply she tasted old iron. 3 nights earlier, Thornmere's accounting hall had smelled of lamp oil and mildew. Rain tapped at the shutters while Steward Halric stood over the long table and rapped the ledger with his ring. Read it, he said. Names, debts, transfer values. Luna read because refusal meant hunger. She read because disobedience meant the chain room. She read until the columns stopped being numbers and became girls she had shared floor pallets with. Girls sent north with no return entry. Girls marked as collateral against loans signed by houses now calling themselves saviors of the border. When she reached the last page, she saw Sebastian Valewood's crest copied and forged on grain seizure orders dated after his pack's fall. Food diverted, villages starved, orphans sold to settle shortages the nobles had manufactured. Halric watched her face and smiled without warmth. You are quick. That is why buyers like you. I am not for sale, she had said before caution could stop her. His expression flattened. Everyone is for sale. Some by the pound, some by the hour, some by the lie. He signaled to the guard by the door. Take her to the lower pen, branding at dawn. New mark, new paperwork. The old one is ugly. That was the breaking point. Simple and absolute. Not the threat of pain, not even the chain itself. It was the certainty that if she let them press a second brand into her skin, every name in that ledger would die as bookkeeping error. She had moved on instinct then, sweeping the ink pot into the lamp flame. Fire climbed the tablecloth in a breath. Men shouted. One grabbed her braid, she twisted, left hair in his fist, and drove her elbow backward until his grip broke. She snatched the ledger, wrapped it in the oiled grain map, and ran through smoke-thick corridors while bells clanged across the estate. She remembered the kennel yard mud pulling at her boots, the bitter reek of wolfsbane from storage crates, the sound of Halric screaming, "Lock the east gate! She knows too much!" At the wall she found the laundry pulley still tied where old Mira had shown her, years ago, when kindness had to masquerade as routine. Luna looped the rope, dropped to the drainage ditch, and hit frozen water hard enough to knock air from her lungs. She crawled through reeds, belly to sludge, while lantern beams crossed above her. A boy from the kitchen spotted her at the culvert and stared. She pressed a finger to her lips. He looked away and shouted in the opposite direction. She went toward the stables. She ran all night with wet boots and smoke in her throat, traded the last of her copper for forged papers at dawn, and reached the shattered market with one thought repeating in rhythm with her steps. Deliver the ledger before they erase you. Now, in the market square, the same estate guard raised his warrant hook toward her arm. Sebastian moved between them and caught Luna's hand to pull her behind him. Heat raced up both their arms, sudden and blinding, and the market sound dropped into a high, ringing hush. His breath stalled. Her pulse matched his in one startling beat, then another, as if some buried mechanism had recognized itself and locked into place. Amber in his eyes deepened toward molten gold. The scar along his throat lit with a pale burn as though old wounds had remembered fire. He stared at her with open disbelief, grip loosening but not releasing. Elowen's voice came soft and grave behind them. She carries frostborn blood. The guard barked an order for seizure anyway, but no one moved immediately. Too many people had felt the shift. Too many had seen the Alpha freeze like a struck bell with a servant girl at his back and his mother standing in witness. Luna held the ledger tighter beneath her cloak, fear and fierce, aching hope colliding so hard it nearly hurt to breathe. Her life had narrowed to one impossible bargain: trust the man who could save her or destroy her with equal ease, and speak before anyone else wrote her story for her. Sebastian did not look away from her as the guard's warrant hook hovered in the space between them. The crux of the moment was stark enough for the whole market to read. If he treated her as contraband, the crowd would follow. If he treated her as protected, every house profiting from debt chains would call it rebellion. He shifted half a step, placing his body fully between Luna and the mounted men, and lifted his free hand, palm out, in the old command signal that halted even skittish war horses. "She is under my shield until this warrant is examined," he said. His voice carried without shouting. "Any seizure attempt now is a challenge to Valewood authority on treaty ground." The lead guard laughed once, brittle and performative. "Treaty ground does not erase ownership." Elowen turned her head with precise disdain. "Ownership is what cowards call theft when they add wax." The crowd murmured. A fishmonger crossed himself with moonsign. Someone near the spice cart whispered that Elowen had spoken Mooncrown law in public for the first time since the veil burned. Luna stood in the narrow shelter of Sebastian's shoulder, pulse still synced too closely to his, every sense sharpened to pain. She could smell horse leather, rain-soaked stone, and the metallic edge of wolfsbane residue on one guard's gloves. Thornmere. Of course they had brought it. Her fingers tightened around the oilskin-wrapped ledger under her cloak. "I have council seal," the guard snapped, producing a tube. "Hand over the girl and read it yourself." Sebastian took the document, split the wax with his thumb, and scanned the page. Something in his expression went flat. "This crest is outdated by 2 sessions. The council retired this stamp after forgery disputes." The guard's jaw flexed. "We use what we were issued." "You used what was useful," Sebastian replied. He folded the decree once and handed it to Elowen. "Mother?" Elowen read, then raised her voice just enough for the nearest witnesses. "No living witness signature, no adjudicator mark, no lawful chain of transfer. This is a threat dressed as process." That should have ended it. It did not. The guard spurred his horse a pace forward and reached down for Luna's wrist anyway. Sebastian moved with frightening economy. His hand caught the man's forearm mid-grab, twisted, and forced it away from Luna without striking a blow. The rider swore and reached for the warrant hook with his other hand. Sebastian's lip lifted from his canine teeth, and a low warning rolled out of his chest, more wolf than man. Amber bled brighter through his irises, predator surfacing in plain sight. "Do not mistake restraint for weakness," he said quietly. No one advanced after that. He released the guard, turned to Luna, and held out his hand again, this time open and deliberate. "Can you ride?" She nodded once. He guided her through the parted crowd toward the western arch, where his men waited with pack mules and sealed grain tubes. No one touched her. No one dared. Behind them, market voices surged back in fragmented bursts, rumor already multiplying. Elowen bowed, the Alpha intervened. The servant was frostborn. The old blood was not dead. At the arch, Sebastian's lieutenant, a rangy wolf with a scar through one eyebrow, stared at Luna as if assessing whether she might explode. Orders? Return route changed, Sebastian said. No southern pass. We ride River Ridge and Close Gate on arrival. The lieutenant glanced at Luna's wrapped wrist and then away. Understood. Sebastian swung into the saddle and reached down. Luna hesitated for half a beat, then placed her hand in his. The same heat traveled up her arm, less explosive than before, but no less profound, like stepping into current and discovering it knew her name. He drew a sharp breath and steadied. She climbed behind him, one hand braced at his belt, the other locked around the ledger. They rode hard through the broken outskirts where shell-cracked walls leaned into alleys and roofless chapels held nests of crows. As the market noise fell behind, hoofbeats and wind took over, rhythmic and relentless. Luna fought the sway of exhaustion by counting landmarks. Split cedar at the crossroads, abandoned watchtower, stream cut with slate. Sebastian's cloak snapped against her knees. His back was warm through travel leather, a dangerous comfort she did not trust. In her mind, thought stopped being linear and became command. Do not sleep. Do not hand over the ledger until witnesses are in the room. Do not confuse protection with safety. He is Alpha first. He is warmth. He could cage you with a single word. He just stood between you and a hook. Breathe. Keep breathing. Survive long enough to choose. By full dark, the ridge opened to a valley that might once have been beautiful in an easy way. Now it was beautiful in the harder sense, the kind rebuilt after loss. The outer fields bore fresh furrows between old scorch lines. Stone boundary posts had been reset, each carved with moon rune and pack oath. Lanterns traced a repaired palisade. Beyond it, the keep rose from black rock, still half ruined on its eastern face, new timber bracing old fractures like stitched bone. This was his territory. Not polished Cortland, not untouched wealth. A place dragged back from ash by stubborn hands. At the gate, sentries lowered spears until they recognized Sebastian, then thumped fist to chest in greeting. Their gazes shifted to Luna with open curiosity, then sharpened when Elowen rode in behind the grain train and dismounted beside her with unhurried dignity. Elowen did not announce anything. She simply stood near Luna as if the position itself were declaration. A gray-muzzled gatekeeper approached with a lantern and the formal entry bowl for bloodmark checks, routine for strangers after the raids. Name for record. Luna's mouth felt dry. Luna Frostborn. The old wolf blinked once, then hid it. Palm to stone, by law. She glanced at Sebastian. He gave a single nod. Not pressure, not permission, only acknowledgement that she still had agency in this place if she claimed it. She unwound the wool from her right wrist. The burned brand, warped and angry against her skin, drew a tight silence from the guards. Luna ignored their stares, shifted the ledger under her left arm, and pressed her right palm to the entry stone. For a breath, nothing happened. Then pale silver lines awakened beneath the surface, old runes answering blood they recognized. The glow spread in branching threads around her hand and climbed the post in a brief, unmistakable flare before fading. No one spoke. Sebastian's gaze fixed on the stone, then on her, and that unreadable reserve in him cracked just enough for awe to show. Tension coiled through the gateyard, not hostile but charged, as if an ancient mechanism had just turned for the first time in years. She enters under oath guest protection, he said at last, voice rougher than before. Record it. The gatekeeper bowed his head. Record it, Alpha. Inside, the keep smelled of wet mortar, pine pitch and stew stretched thin with barley. Wolves moved through corridors carrying planks, ledgers, and sacks of grain, rebuilding while they lived, living while they rebuilt. Luna had expected grandeur or decay. She found labor. Sebastian led her to a small war room off the main hall, where a fire burned low and maps covered the table. Elowen dismissed attendants with a look and closed the door behind them. For the first time since the market, silence settled without witnesses. Luna set the oilskin bundle on the table but kept her fingers on it. "If I hand this over, I need terms." Sebastian studied her face as though translating a language he had once known and forgotten. "State them." "2 copies made tonight, one held by your archive master, one by a neutral temple clerk. Public reading at council, not private review. No alterations, no delayed filing." Elowen's mouth curved, faint and approving. She negotiates like someone who expects betrayal. "Because betrayal is common," Luna said. Sebastian nodded once. Agreed. He stepped nearer, then stopped with visible effort, the restraint almost painful to watch. "I need to inspect your wrist. If there is wolfsbane in the scar tissue, fever can set in fast. I will not touch you without your consent." The question in that simple pause undid something tightly bound behind Luna's ribs. Men in authority had never asked. They had taken, ordered, branded, transferred. Choice had been a story other people told. "Yes," she said, and hated how much the word shook. He moved to her side slowly, as if approaching a frightened animal he refused to corner. His fingers were calloused and unexpectedly careful when he unwound the last strip of wool. The skin beneath was raw where sweat and friction had reopened old damage. He did not flinch. He did not pity. He only reached for the water basin, poured warmed pine resin rinse over a cloth, and cleaned the burn with steady hands. When his thumb brushed the inside of her wrist, the bond surged again. Warmth climbed her arm in a spiraling rush, then crossed her chest and settled low in her belly like a struck chord. Sound narrowed. Firelight sharpened. The scent of cedar and rain from his skin became overwhelming. Sebastian inhaled sharply, shoulders locking, and lifted his head. Amber in his eyes deepened toward molten metal, luminous at the edges. Luna forgot how to pull breath. Inside her, desire and terror collided with almost equal force, not desire for possession, desire for recognition so complete it frightened her more than threat ever had. She wanted to step closer and to flee to the stables, to trust and to build a dozen new walls in the same heartbeat. The animal part of her went rigid, alert to every flicker of his pulse under his throat. Sebastian's voice dropped to a rasp. "Luna." Just her name. Nothing else. It sounded like promise and plea braided together. For an instant, the room wavered and she saw him not as rumor or alpha, but as a man held together by discipline after catastrophic loss. Scars under his collar. Grief hammered into posture. Power worn like armor he no longer believed in, except when others needed it. And beneath all of it, a hunger he was fighting with everything he had because he would rather hurt than frighten her. The bond answered that restraint with fierce, almost reverent certainty. Their gazes locked. No witnesses, no counsel, no market noise to hide behind. Just the raw fact of recognition, bright and terrifying, suspended between them like a blade and a lifeline at once. The raw silence broke when Sebastian released her wrist and stepped back far enough to give her breathing room, though his hand stayed flexed at his sides, as if restraint cost him effort. Elowen watched both of them with an expression Luna could not decode, then reached for the ledger. "If we are wise, we secure this first." Luna kept her palm on the oilskin. "Witnesses for every copy." "You have my word," Elowen said. Luna met her gaze. "I have lived through words." A faint, approving tilt touched the older woman's mouth. "Then we will use protocol." She crossed to the door, called for the archive master, and returned with wax, seals, and 2 neutral clerks from the temple quarter housed in the keep for ration records. Everything happened quickly, almost clinically. The ledger was opened under 4 pairs of eyes, pages counted aloud, signatures entered, duplicate copies assigned. No one touched Luna while it was done. No one asked where she had hidden it, whom she had bribed, what else she knew. Sebastian stood near the hearth and said very little, but she felt his attention like heat at her back. When the final seal cooled, Elowen gathered 1 copy and handed another to the eldest clerk. Temple Vault by dawn, direct route with 2 escorts. The clerk bowed. Recorded and witnessed. Only after the door closed behind them did Sebastian look at Luna again. You have eaten? She shook her head. He rang for broth and dark bread, then surprised her by moving toward the corridor instead of taking the chair across from her. You need rest more than questions. Suspicion rose faster than relief. You are not going to ask about the names? About the forged Valewood orders? I am. His voice stayed level. Not while your hands are still shaking. She hated that he had noticed. She hated more that he was right. He paused at the threshold, broad frame half in shadow. The south guest room is warmest. You can lock it from inside. No one enters without your permission, including me. Luna stared at him, waiting for the hidden condition. None came. When he had gone, she sat alone with broth steaming in front of her, and the room finally stopped spinning enough for fear to reorganize itself into thought. I should be interrogated by now. I should be pinned to a chair with 3 nobles asking the same question in different voices until I contradict myself. I should be bargaining over pain. This is what power does. This is what men with titles do. This is what survival taught me to expect. But he asked permission. He stepped back when the bond flared instead of closing in. He put legal witnesses around the ledger before touching a single page. If this is strategy, it is precise and patient, the kind that takes my defenses apart without force. If this is mercy, I do not know where to put it, because mercy has always carried a price hidden in small print. I am tired enough to believe him for 5 breaths at a time. 5 breaths is not trust. 5 breaths is still a beginning. The broth tasted of bone and thyme and too much salt. It steadied her anyway. A young attendant led her through a corridor stitched with repair beams to a narrow guest room overlooking the inner yard. Rain tapped the arrow-slit window. Someone had laid clean linen on the bed and set a brazier near the wall. When Luna peeled off her boots, she hissed at the torn heel seam and the blistered skin beneath. The attendant hovered with nervous sympathy. Shall I call the healer? No. Luna softened her tone. Thank you. I only need water. The girl brought a basin and left. Luna barred the door, stripped off her damp outer layers, and sat on the edge of the mattress with her back against cold stone, too wired to sleep. The brand on her wrist throbbed in rhythm with the storm. She had just begun rewrapping it when a knock sounded, 3 measured taps. Luna, Sebastian said from the other side. May I come in? Her pulse jumped. Yes. He entered carrying a fresh cloth, a small jar of resin salve, and his own heavy fur cloak folded over one arm. He had removed his outer weapons belt, a signal she recognized as deliberate de-escalation. His gaze found the open blister at her heel, and his jaw tightened. Your boots are splitting, he said. They have done me the favor of lasting this long. A brief exhale left him, almost a laugh, but rough at the edges. Stubborn leather, stubborn wolf. The humor was small, no more than a crack in tension, yet it loosened something in her chest. He knelt a respectful distance away and held up the salve. Permission? She nodded. His hands worked with the same careful precision as before, cleaning the torn skin at her heel, spreading resin that smelled of pine and winter mint, wrapping the burn without tugging. The bond hummed low between them, a live wire he never once tried to pull tighter. When he finished, he set the cloak beside her rather than draping it over her shoulders. It is colder after midnight, he said. Take this. She looked from the cloak to his shirt, already darkened at the collar from rain. And you? I have survived worse nights. Because you choose them. Yes. The answer sat between them, simple and unadorned. At last he met her eyes fully. There is a reason I am not pressing you tonight. His throat moved once before he continued. I lost my first pack because I believed testimony extracted under fear. I signed orders based on panic and hearsay, and by the time truth reached me, pyres were already burning. I do not make that mistake again. Not with you. Not with anyone. Luna's breath left her slowly. This was not apology, not performance. It sounded like a wound held open on purpose. You think I might lie, she said. I think you have been hunted, he replied. Hunted people edit truth to survive. I would rather hear the whole of it when you can speak without flinching at every footstep. He stood, paused at the door, and set a key on the table. Lock it. I will be outside. As a guard? As a promise. After he left, Luna wrapped herself in his cloak because refusing warmth out of pride felt childish and pointless. It smelled like cedar smoke and rain-damp wool. The bed was softer than any surface she trusted, so she sat against the wall until exhaustion dragged her under in fragments. She woke to gray pre-dawn light and the distant percussion of hammers in the yard. For one disoriented moment she thought she was back in Thornmere and reached for the hidden ledger that was no longer under her ribs. Then she saw the barred door, the cloak around her shoulders, and two things that made her go still. Her boots sat on the table, cleaned and restitched at the heel with neat waxed thread. And through the narrow crack beneath the door, she could see the edge of Sebastian's fur-lined sleeve where he sat on the corridor floor, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of breath. By first light, rain had thinned to mist, and the keep shifted from night watch to council rhythm. Luna found him already on his feet when she opened the door, as if he had sensed her waking. You repaired them, she said, lifting one boot. His expression turned almost sheepish, incongruous on a war-scarred alpha. My quartermaster taught every surviving soldier to mend gear after the siege. Waste kills as surely as blades. Do all your guests get this service? Only the ones who run through markets carrying evidence that can topple 3 houses. The corner of her mouth betrayed her with the smallest smile. So I am a special maintenance case. High risk, moderate cooperation. The exchange lasted less than a minute, yet it settled into her like a cautious truce. He escorted her to the great room for rebuilding council, not touching her, merely matching pace. Wolves and minor nobles filled the long hall around a scarred strategy table patched from different woods. Grain maps were pinned beside casualty lists and winter supply tallies. Hunger was no abstract threat here. It was written in ink. Conversations dipped when Luna entered. Councillor Merrick, narrow-faced and perfumed despite the workman hall, let his disdain show openly. We are discussing territorial rationing, not market charity. Another minor noble, Lady Tamsin, clicked her tongue. Is this truly necessary, Sebastian? Rumor already says your judgment is compromised. Luna felt old reflexes return, the practiced shrinking that made predators lose interest. She planted both palms on the back of an empty chair instead. Sebastian remained standing at the head of the table. She stays. Merrick gave a brittle smile. On what standing? She arrived with forged papers and a brand. By custom, she waits in servants' quarters until vetted. Something ancient moved across Sebastian's features, not rage exactly, but authority stripped to bone. His pupils narrowed. A hint of fang showed as he spoke, voice carrying through stone and timber. Old Pack Law, Article 7. Any insult to a bond-marked guest is challenged to the Alpha's protection. You may retract, or you may formalize challenge now. Silence slammed down. Several wolves at the wall straightened, scenting confrontation. Marek swallowed. I intended no challenge. Then choose your next words with care. He turned to Luna and pulled a rolled map from the stack. You said in the war room that villages were starved by rerouted caravans. Show this council. Dozens of eyes fixed on her. Shame tried to climb her throat, familiar and choking. She forced herself to step forward, spread the map, and anchor her finger at Thornmere's stamp. Official route is marked here through Red Birch Pass, she said, voice steadier with each sentence. But convoys were diverted east at night to private storehouses near Coldstream. The ledgers call it spoilage mitigation. It was seizure. Villages on this line were then charged emergency grain prices to buy back what was taken. She traced a second path from memory, naming dates, team numbers, mule counts. Murmurs shifted from skepticism to alarm as figures aligned with missing stock reports. If you reopen the River Ridge Road and post neutral way clerks at these two bridges, you cut theft by half in one cycle, she finished. If you also rotate escorts across pack lines, no single house can bury losses in its own books. Lady Tamsin leaned in despite herself. How do you know escort rotations? I scheduled them, Luna said. From a locked office where they thought I could add, but not understand. A low, involuntary sound of respect came from one of Sebastian's captains near the hearth. Marek was not done. He rounded the table, face hard with humiliation. Convenient expertise from an accused fugitive. He reached for Luna's forearm, fingers closing just above her wrist wrap. Sebastian moved in a blur and brought his palm down on the table edge with a crack that split the central plank clean through. Wood jumped. Ink pots rattled. Marek jerked his hand back as if burned. Touch her again, Sebastian said, very quiet. And you answer to me outside law. No one mistook him. The room held that charged stillness for 3 heartbeats. Then Elawin, who had entered unnoticed and taken place by the rear pillar, stepped forward. Record this, she said to the council scribe. Luna Frostborn provided verifiable logistics that preserve winter stores. Her testimony is entered as strategic evidence under my seal. The scribe, wide-eyed, scratched furiously across the page. The discussion resumed, transformed. Questions came to Luna directly now, terse and practical rather than contemptuous. She answered each with clean precision, and when she lacked certainty, she said so without hedging. By the time the council adjourned, 2 captains were already arguing over which bridge team could be reassigned first. As chairs scraped and voices rose, Luna remained by the fractured table, staring at the split wood where Sebastian's hand had landed. Protection had always arrived in her life as ownership in disguise. This had not. He had not spoken for her when she could speak. He had drawn a line only when someone tried to put hands on her body, then handed the room back to her competence. Sebastian came to stand beside her, close enough that she felt warmth, far enough to keep choice intact. Are you all right? She looked at him for a long moment, weighing history against evidence, fear against the steady pattern of his restraint. Then, slowly, she placed her repaired boot on the bench, met his gaze, and said, I am not all right yet. But I am still here. It was not surrender. It was not a vow. It was, for Luna, far more difficult. It was the first piece of trust. A chair scraped behind them, and the sound carried like a blade across the settling room. Luna turned with Sebastian and saw a woman framed in the great hall doorway as though she had rehearsed the entrance to the inch. Vivienne Valewood wore mourning black tailored to court standards, not border weather. Her gloves pearl-buttoned, her dark hair bound in a silver net that caught the lamplight. She was beautiful in the severe way of carved marble, and she smiled at Sebastian with practiced intimacy before allowing her gaze to settle on Luna. That smile did not falter. It simply thinned, becoming something polite enough to deny and sharp enough to wound. Cousin, she said, crossing the floor with 2 attendants and a clerk carrying document tubes. I rode through sleet to bring you council updates and found your hall hosting spectacle. You do know people are talking. Elowin stepped from the scribe table with the calm authority that had silenced a market full of armed men. People are always talking. Speak your business. Vivian bowed correctly to Elowin, then offered Sebastian the kind of half-curtsy reserved for private alliances. My business is stability. Grain pacts are fragile. Border houses panic at scandal. If they believe this keep has become sanctuary for forged identities and stolen records, they will close their roads by next moon. Luna held her ground, though instinct told her to move out of center sightline. Vivienne's attention shifted to her wrapped wrist, then to Sebastian, reading distance, reading breath, reading anything she could convert into leverage. A servant girl sits at strategy council, Vivienne went on lightly. A surprising reform, unless she is more than she appears. Shall we call her what rumor calls her? Frostborn heir, bond-marked guest, future Luna. The hall went taut. Sebastian's expression did not move. You came to deliver reports, he said. Deliver them. Vivienne's eyes cooled. Very well. First report. Thornmere petitioned for return of escaped debt chattel identified as Luna, no house name. Second report. 3 survivors from your fallen western flank have arrived at court and requested formal audience. They claim a woman matching her description sold route details to raiders the week your scouts vanished. Third report. The council requests an inquiry under Moon Trial Protocol before recognizing any blood claim tied to the old crown. The words landed with procedural neatness, each one selected to cut legitimacy rather than flesh. Luna felt the room tip under her feet, not from surprise but from the precision of the attack. Vivienne had not come to rage or threaten openly. She had come to place legal stones around a throat and call it governance. Elowin held out her hand for the petition tube. Vivienne passed it over without looking away from Luna. I grieve that this is unpleasant, she said, and grief did not touch her voice. But law exists to protect us from sentiment. Law exists to protect the weak from the well-dressed, Elowin replied, scanning the seal. This decree is filed by Councillor Dane, whose estates buy labor transfers from Thornmere through proxies. Conflict of interest invalidates his petition. Vivienne's composure tightened by a fraction. Dane is 1 signature. There are 6 more. Then 6 more can answer in open hearing. Sebastian stepped forward, presence filling the fractured space around the split table. No moon trial until I examine every witness statement personally. No custody transfer. Luna remains under my shield. Vivienne's gaze went briefly feral, something ancient looking out through polished court manners. Then she exhaled and smiled again. Of course, I would never challenge your shield. I would only caution that hunger makes wolves impatient, and impatient wolves turn on leaders who court controversy. She inclined her head to Luna, a gesture so exact it felt like mockery of Elowin's market bow. Rest well in borrowed safety. When she left, the temperature of the room seemed to drop with her absence. Luna realized her hand had closed so hard around the back of the chair that her knuckles ached. Sebastian noticed and eased the chair from her grip without comment. Elowin had already reopened the petition, eyes narrowing as she tracked marginal notations. She moved faster than I expected, Elowin said. The survivor testimonies are timed to your grain accords. If she stains Luna before the Treaty Council convenes, the houses gain moral cover to starve us without naming it. She expected me to deny you entry, Sebastian said to Luna, voice low. When I did not, she shifted to public process. Luna looked toward the dark doorway where Vivienne had vanished. She expected you to choose optics over me. A muscle jumped in Sebastian's jaw. She has spent years betting on what I will sacrifice first. The crux hardened in Luna's chest. Vivienne did not merely want her removed. She wanted Sebastian governable through shame, Elowin discredited, and the old blood claim buried under procedure so no one could challenge the debt economy feeding half the council. Luna was the immediate target. Legitimacy was the prize. That evening, in the narrow quiet after hall lamps were lowered, Luna sat on the edge of her bed, with the repaired boots lined beneath the chair and Sebastian's cloak around her shoulders. Rain had stopped. Wind moved through the arrow slit in soft pulses that smelled of wet stone and pine smoke. She should have been cataloging names from the ledger by memory, preparing testimony, planning contingencies. Instead, she kept replaying the way Sebastian had said she remained under his shield, not as ownership, but as vow. In her mind, thought came in present tense, stripped raw by fatigue. I know this pattern and I do not know it at all. Power says protect, then it invoices the cost with interest. Power says stay, then closes the door from outside. But he asks and waits. He stands near without taking the choice from my hands. I am drawn toward him with a force that scares me because wanting can become a chain as quickly as fear can. If I lean into this bond, I could lose myself in it. If I refuse it, I hand Vivian the narrative she wants, that I am a liar hiding behind his name. I need to be clear, strategic, unbreakable. I also need one place in this keep where I am not braced for impact. I do not know yet whether that place is him. I only know my pulse settles when he is at the door. A knock sounded. 2 measured taps. Luna, Sebastian said. May I enter? Yes. He came in carrying a tray of tea and hard cheese. No attendants, no documents. He set the tray on the table and remained standing until she motioned to the second chair. The bond hummed low between them, a steady thrum neither of them fed and neither of them denied. Vivienne will push for a trial date within days, he said. I can block once, perhaps twice. After that, refusal costs us supply lines. Then we do not refuse, Luna answered. We control terms. His gaze sharpened with reluctant respect. You would walk into a moon trial they designed to break you. I have lived in rooms designed to break me. She folded her hands to keep them from shaking. The difference is witnesses. He sat, leaning forward, forearms on his knees. There is another pressure point. The survivors she brought were mine, wolves who escaped the Western fire. If they testify against you, some of my captains will believe them before they believe paper. Luna held his gaze. Do you? No. The word came without hesitation. But belief is not the same as trust repaired after trauma. My wolves carry graves in their throats. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Sebastian reached into his pocket and placed a small iron token on the table, worn smooth at the edges. The Valewood war mark. Command access. If I am pulled into council chambers and you need immediate authority to cross this keep, show that to any guard. It will be honored. She stared at the token. You trust me with command sign. I trust you with survival. The line might have sounded severe from another mouth. From his, it sounded like devotion still learning how to speak. By the second night after Vivienne's arrival, rumor had moved faster than riders. Stable hands repeated that Luna had forged bloodlight at the gatestone with hidden reagents. A baker's wife swore she had seen Thornmere coin in Luna's satchel. 2 junior guards argued in the yard whether bond recognition could be faked by wolfsbane delirium. Each story carried the same undercurrent. If Luna was fraud, every reform proposed from her ledger could be dismissed as enemy sabotage. Eloin countered with relentless process. Witness lists were posted publicly, seal chains were displayed in the archive hall. Every copy of the ledger was compared line by line before appointed clerks. Yet for every fact established, Vivienne supplied 2 emotional knives. She visited infirmary cots where siege survivors still woke choking on smoke memories, sat at their bedsides, and asked gentle questions about betrayal. She sent baskets of sugared almonds to minor nobles' wives, with notes mourning the dangerous confusion clouding the keep. She attended dawn prayers beside captains' mothers and spoke of duty, lineage, and how grief could make strong men vulnerable to manipulation. 3 days passed before the first direct blow landed. Luna entered the map room at dusk to find Aloan seated alone with a silver tea service and one untouched cup. The older woman's posture remained regal, but her skin had gone ashen beneath powder, and a tremor moved through her left hand when she reached for the decree stack. "You are unwell," Luna said, crossing the room. "A passing weakness," Elowen replied, and then paused to steady her breathing. "Do not summon alarm yet." Luna knelt beside her anyway and caught the cup before it tipped. A bitter medicinal scent rose from the tea, masked under rose and clove. Not enough to name, enough to warn. Alowan saw Luna notice and gave the smallest nod, confirmation without panic. "Who poured this?" Luna asked. "House service sent from court pantry this afternoon." Vivian insisted on reviving proper hosting rituals. Alowan's mouth thinned. "I drank half before the dizziness started." Footsteps pounded in the corridor. Oui. Sebastian entered with his lieutenant and stopped short at the sight of his mother's pallor. "Healer, now!" he ordered. As the lieutenant ran, Elowen gripped Sebastian's wrist with surprising force. "Listen before they crowd this room." The council courier arrived. She gestured toward a sealed tube on the table. "Moon trial confirmed for tomorrow night under emergency legitimacy clause. Presiding elder, Dain." Sebastian went very still. "That is unlawful speed." "Lawful enough if Panic signs it," Elowen said. "They are using my illness as proof the house is destabilized." Luna opened the tube while Sebastian supported his mother. The decree named charges in formal script: imposter blood claim, theft of bonded property, conspiracy in wartime betrayal. Attached were 3 witness affidavits stamped with the marks of survivors from Sebastian's destroyed flank. At the bottom, in fresh ink, a procedural addition: truth verification by Wolfsbane smoke within rune circle. Her stomach dropped. Wolfsbane smoke dulled scent and elevated fear responses. Under interrogation, a truthful witness could look guilty to an untrained crowd. A lie could be staged as righteous certainty by anyone who knew the theater. "This is not trial," Luna said. "It is execution by ritual." Sebastian read the clause and his control fractured. Amber flooded his eyes, his canines lengthening as a low growl shook the room. "I will tear Dane's chamber apart before I let them put you in that circle." Luna stepped in front of him, forcing him to look at her instead of the decree. "That is what they want. Another duel. Another story where I survive because you break rules for me." He was breathing too hard, grief and fury and bond hunger colliding. "They poisoned my mother." "Then we answer with proof, not rage." The healer arrived with satchels and assistants, and the room filled with movement. Elowen was helped toward her chambers, still conscious, still issuing clipped directives between waves of nausea. At the threshold, she looked back at Luna, eyes sharp despite pain. "Do not let them define the terms," she said. "Bring truth they cannot unsee." Then she was gone into the corridor, Sebastian torn between following and staying, decree crumpled in his fist. From the outer yard came the clang of the warning bell, not attack, but summons. Wolves were already gathering in knots, reading posted notices by torchlight, voices rising as the moon trial announcement spread through the keep. Luna stepped to the arrow slit and saw Vivian below in the courtyard, cloak immaculate, speaking softly to a cluster of captains while a clerk nailed the decree to the board. Vivian lifted her face toward the map room window as if she felt Luna watching, and for one cold heartbeat, their eyes met across stone and torch smoke. Vivian smiled and pressed 2 fingers to her heart in a gesture that looked like respect from a distance. It was a countdown. It was a countdown, and Luna understood that if she waited for morning, she would be reacting inside rules Vivian had written for her. She left the window and faced Sebastian, while the courtyard bell still echoed through stone. Postcards on every brazier store, she said. Seal the court pantry and the clerk's archive. If she planted wolfsbane in trial smoke, she used house staff and a steward with keys. He stared at her, breath still rough with anger. You think this is already in motion? I think it started before she rode through the gate. Luna held up the decree tube. Emergency clause, pre-written affidavits, presiding elder chosen in advance. This was never a response to rumor. It was a trap waiting for a body. The lieutenant returned from Alowan's corridor and gave a curt nod. Healer confirms poison, not fever. Bitter root blend, low dose, cumulative. Sebastian closed his eyes for one beat, and when he opened them, command had replaced fury. Double watches. No one from Vivienne's entourage moves unescorted. Bring the 3 survivors to holding under oath, not irons. I want them alive and sober. The lieutenant thumped fist to chest and ran. Luna crossed to the table and flattened the crumpled decree. Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. At trial, Dane will use those survivors first. He will force grief into testimony, then frame my fear response as guilt under smoke. Sebastian stepped close enough that she felt his heat, but he did not touch. I can still refuse. You can, she said, and lose your grain roads before winter. Lose half this keep to panic. Lose your claim that law matters when it protects someone with no rank. She drew a breath that scraped. Let them convene. His jaw tightened. You are asking me to watch them corner you. I am asking you to trust what I came here carrying. Her hand pressed to her sternum as if the ledger still rode beneath her cloak. Truth, memory, blood. For a heartbeat, he looked like a man standing at the edge of an old fire. Then he gave one hard nod. If they break protocol, I end it. If I tell you to stay back, you stay back. Pain crossed his face, quick and unhidden. That is a brutal request. It is the only one that gives me a voice no one can dismiss as borrowed. He bowed his head once, warrior to equal, and the gesture landed deeper than any vow she had yet heard from him. By the next moonrise, the keep's central court had been remade into a tribunal ring. Torches burned blue along the walls, and iron braziers smoked with a bitter herb blend that rasped at Luna's throat the moment she entered. Wolfsbane, diluted but present, deliberate. The moonstone dais stood at the center, runes etched in concentric circles from an older age when bloodline trials were considered sacred instead of theatrical. Captains lined the left gallery. Minor nobles and treaty envoys crowded the right. At the rear, common wolves stood shoulder to shoulder, silent with hunger, fear, and furious curiosity. Alowan sat upright on a carved chair near the front, paler than usual, but awake and watching with predatory focus. A healer lingered behind her with antidote files. Dane presided in layered gray robes, his voice smooth as polished bone. Luna Frostborn, called claimant, stepped forward. Luna moved into the first ring. Sebastian remained at the perimeter where protocol required, arms folded, eyes fixed on her with a vigilance that made several counselors avoid his gaze. Vivienne stood opposite in black silk, hands clasped, expression composed into concern. Her steward lingered 2 paces behind her with lowered eyes. The first survivor took the witness stone. He was broad-shouldered, with burn scars climbing his neck, and the hollowed look of a wolf who slept in fragments. He would not meet Sebastian's eyes. State your claim, Dane said. The survivor swallowed. During the Western Retreat, a servant girl from Thornmere approached our supply scouts with rude advice. Hours later, raiders hit that exact path. My brother died in that pass. A murmur moved through the hall. Sebastian's fingers flexed once against his sleeve. The second witness spoke of seeing Luna near a signal fire. The third swore he heard her bargaining for safe passage with men wearing rival colors. Their words were clean, too clean, polished by rehearsal. Between statements, Vivienne lowered her lashes like a grieving relative, forced to endure ugly truth. Luna felt the smoke tighten around her lungs and fought the old panic that came when men in power named her a liar in public. She heard Dane preparing the final procedural step and understood that if she answered within his script, she would drown in it. Think now. Choose now. I stand in a ring designed to read fear as guilt. I can plead, and he will call it manipulation. I can stay silent, and he will call it admission. I can look to Sebastian, and they will say, this is his voice wearing my face. I am done borrowing survival from other people's mercy. I know what I carry. I know the names. I know the signatures. I know the steward who brought tea to Eloan with his left hand shaking because he hates poison, but loves coin more. If the right burns me, it burns me telling truth in my own blood. If I fall where everyone can see why. Dane lifted a bronze censer and tipped fresh powder into the brazier. The smoke thickened. By moon law, we test claim and candor. Do you submit? Sebastian took one step forward. I object to wolfsbane concentration. This exceeds prescribed measure. Dane did not look at him. Objection denied. Luna raised her voice before Sebastian could challenge again. I submit. And I invoke Frostborn inheritance right under stone witness. The hall jolted into silence. Even Dane blinked. That right is dormant, he snapped. You cannot. I can by blood. She drew a small utility blade from her sleeve, sliced her palm, and pressed it flat to the moonstone before anyone could move to stop her. Cold light exploded through the runes, silver threaded with gold, racing across carved lines and up the dais in branching veins. The braziers guttered, as if the court itself had inhaled. Luna's knees nearly buckled, but she locked them and kept her hand in place while the rite climbed through her like fire poured into bone. Images tore outward into shared mind link, not stories, memory. A counting hall at Thornmere where girls stood in chains while clerks assigned values beside their names. Forged Valewood seals pressed into hot wax over grain seizure orders dated after Sebastian's fall. Night caravans rerouted to private granaries while border villages starved. Vivienne's steward carrying a wrapped packet labeled medicinal clove into Eloan's chambers, passing coin to a pantry maid whose face pinched with fear. A chest of wolfsbane powder transferred from court stores to trial braziers under Dane's authorization mark. The three survivors in a side room, each handed debt forgiveness writs in exchange for sworn testimony, each flinching as Vivienne said softly that loyalty to the dead required sacrifice from the living. Gasps and cries broke across the galleries as witnesses relived the visions in real time. One captain doubled over, retching from the force of involuntary recall. Eloan gripped her chair arms and did not look away. The right burned hotter. Luna tasted copper and ash. Her arm shook violently. Sebastian surged toward the ring, wolf rising in his posture. Luna, enough! She turned her head, eyes wet with pain, and shouted, Stay back! The command cracked like a whip through bond and hall alike. He stopped at the rune line, chest heaving, every instinct straining against obedience, and stayed where she had put him. Luna pressed harder into the stone and forced one final cascade. Halrich's ledger page with every transferred orphan name, then Vivienne's personal signet approving bonded labor purchases through shell houses. No ambiguity. No escape. When the light finally collapsed, Luna dropped to one knee, palm still bleeding, spine straight with sheer refusal to yield. The court fell into stunned, ringing quiet. Vivienne moved first, her composure shattered into raw panic. She snatched a slender silver hairpin from her own braid and lunged across the dais toward Luna's throat, fast enough that several guards reacted a beat too late. Sebastian vaulted the ring boundary with a snarl, but Luna was already rising. She caught Vivienne's wrist mid-strike, twisted outward, and drove her backward into the moonstone pillar with a force born of adrenaline and fury. The pin clattered across the floor. Vivienne fought, nails scoring at Luna's sleeve, but Luna pinned her forearm high and locked her in place. Projected fragments still flickered above them, replaying theft, poison, and bribery to every face in the hall. Vivian bared her teeth. "You were born to kneel." Luna held her there and answered into full public silence, voice hoarse and steady. "I knelt to survive. You kneel now because everyone finally sees you." "Guards," she said without looking away, "bind her in oath iron." Two wardens moved in with iron cuffs etched for oathbreakers. Vivian thrashed once, then froze when Elowyn rose from her chair and stepped onto the dais despite the healer's protest. Elowyn's voice cut through the chamber like winter steel. "I witnessed the market bow. I witnessed this rite. I witnessed attempted murder in open court. Under Valewood and Mooncrown precedent, Vivian Valewood is stripped of title, inheritance, and council standing." Dane tried to speak, face gray. "This tribunal requires deliberative. It required integrity," Elowyn said. "You supplied poison smoke." Sebastian turned on the presiding elder, gaze gone feral. "Ward him." No one defended Dain when guards took his arms. The three survivors stood trembling near the witness rail. The first one dropped to his knees, tears cutting through soot on his cheeks. "Alpha, we were bought. Debt for our families. We signed." He looked at Luna, broken and ashamed. "I spoke against you. I am sorry." Luna's grip loosened as wardens secured Vivian. Her whole body shook now that the rite had ended, but she stayed upright. "Your apology goes in the record with your confession," she said. "Truth is still useful when it is late." She turned to the scribe, who sat frozen with quill raised. "Write sentence." The quill scratched. "Vivian Valewood is convicted under Pack Law of trafficking, attempted regicide by poison, ritual fraud, and assault before sworn court. Penalty: permanent exile to the ash quarries under warded guard, no correspondence, no proxy rights, labor tithed to restitution fund for bonded survivors." Vivian stared at her as if seeing, at last, the shape of the woman she had tried to erase. "You think this makes you queen?" Luna met the look without flinching. "No. This makes your victims visible." Oath iron clicked shut. The wardens led Vivian down the steps and out through the east gate passage, her silk hem dragging over stone dust. Only when she disappeared did the hall exhale. Sebastian reached Luna in 2 strides and caught her as her strength finally gave way. He did not lift her like spoil. He steadied her with both hands, forehead nearly touching hers, waiting for permission even now. Luna nodded once, and he held her as the court began, at last, to choose who they were going to be. He held her through the first tremor, then the second. One hand braced at her back, the other cupping her blood-slick palm while healers rushed forward with linen and stitchwort. Luna heard voices around them as if from the far end of a tunnel. Elowyn ordering the record sealed, guards hauling Dane toward the lower cells, wardens confirming Vivian had passed the east gate under oath iron. None of it landed fully until Sebastian bent and said against her temple, "Stay with me." "I am here," she whispered, though her knees kept trying to fold. They brought her to the old infirmary chamber off the inner court, where the windows had been reglazed with mismatched panes that turned torchlight into fractured amber. The healer cleaned her cut hand, checked her pupils for wolfsbane reaction, and finally stepped back. "Right burn, not poison. She needs rest, broth, and quiet." Sebastian nodded but did not leave. He sat on the floor beside her cot with his shoulder against the frame, as if he had made a private vow with stone and meant to keep it. By dawn, the keep had not slept, but the air held a new steadiness, the kind that comes after a storm when fallen branches are still everywhere and people start clearing them anyway. Luna woke to the pale edge of morning and found him already watching the light gather. The bond between them no longer struck like lightning. It throbbed, deep and constant, a pulse that met hers and waited. I need to stand, she said. He rose at once. Where? The stone circle. The restored circle sat beyond the eastern wall where winter grass pushed through cracks in ancient paving. Mist clung low over the ground. No court. No witnesses beyond Alawen at a respectful distance near the cedar line, and Sebastian's lieutenant posted farther back with his gaze turned away to grant privacy. Luna stepped into the center rune and faced Sebastian. He looked carved from restraint, hair wind-tossed, jaw shadowed, throat bare above his unlaced collar. She saw the old grief in him and the newer fear, not of battle, but of taking what had not been freely given. He dropped to one knee. The motion stole her breath more than any display of power ever could. No cage, he said, voice rough and clear in the cold air. No crown. No claim without your yes. If you refuse, I still stand with you before this pack, and every house beyond it. Luna felt the tight knot behind her ribs loosen, thread by thread. Look at me. He lifted his gaze. Yes, she said. I choose this. I choose you. The words seemed to move through him like release and ache in the same breath. He rose slowly, giving her every chance to step back. She did not. He touched her cheek first, then the side of her neck, his thumb trembling once before he stilled it. Tell me to stop at any point, he murmured. I will. She turned her head, bearing the curve where neck met shoulder. Morning air cooled her skin. His breath warmed it. Then his teeth found the marking point and pressed in with sharp, clean pain that flashed bright behind her eyes. Luna gripped his forearm, not to push him away, but to anchor herself as the bite deepened. Heat surged from the wound into her chest, down her spine, through every nerve. The pain did not vanish. It changed, unfolding into fierce, almost reverent relief, as if something long clenched inside her had finally been given permission to open. She felt him through the bond with startling clarity. Hunger, devotion, terror of hurting her, and a protective tenderness so vast it nearly dropped her to her knees. He released her at once and pulled back, panting, a thin line of her blood at the corner of his mouth. Luna? She nodded, dizzy and smiling through tears. My turn. His expression went astonished, then intent. He lifted his chin and bared his throat, pulse strong beneath scarred skin. Luna stepped in, cupped the back of his neck, and bit where shoulder met neck, deliberate and unflinching. He shuddered hard against her. A low sound broke from his chest, not pain alone, but recognition answered. The bond snapped tight between them, silver gold light threading from her marked shoulder to his throat in a brief visible arc before sinking under skin. Shared sensation flooded both ways. Rain on cedar bark, his memory of carrying names of the dead like stones, her memory of counting exits in the dark. Then both memories rewoven with the same new certainty. Mine, his thought came, raw and wonderstruck. Yours, she answered without speaking. Mate. They breathed together, foreheads touching. He gathered her into his arms carefully at first, then with full force when she leaned in. They stood that way for a long time, swaying slightly in the dawn wind, feeling the bond settle from wildfire into hearthfire, still powerful, no longer wild with fear. When they finally turned, Elowen was waiting at the circle edge with the moon crown clasp in her hands. She did not interrupt their closeness. She only studied the completed marks and gave a single grave nod. Then let us finish what the market began, she said. The great hall filled before midday, not with spectacle this time, but with witnesses called by name and order, captains, clerks, temple keepers, bridge waymasters, kitchen staff, treaty envoys. Alawen took the high dais, Sebastian at her right, Luna at her left, with her fresh mark visible above a plain dark collar. Record first dispositions, Elowen commanded. The scribe read while runners carried sealed packets to each table. The original Thornmere ledger, recovered by Luna, was entered into Crown Archive under triple seal. One copy went to Temple Vault custody, as promised the night she arrived. The second copy was assigned to traveling auditors for every border granary. Vivian's emergency decree was struck as fraudulent process and preserved only as evidence in Dane's corruption trial. Dane was stripped of presiding rank and remanded to Quarry Tribunal under armed escort. Warrants were issued for Stuart Halrick and all signatories tied to trafficking transfers. Luna stepped forward when her name was called and read the new statute herself, voice carrying to the rear pillars. Debt servitude by person transfer is abolished in Valewood territories and allied roads, effective immediately. Existing bonds are null. Compensation shall be paid from confiscated estates under survivor restitution law. Merrick stood in the second row, pale but upright. He bowed his head. I opposed your seat at this table. I was wrong. Lady Tamsin followed, more formal than warm. My bridge clerks will report directly to your office, High Luna, without house interference. The 3 survivors from Sebastian's western flank were brought forward unshackled. The first man, eyes red-rimmed, placed both palms on the floor. We gave false witness for debt release. We request sentence. Luna looked to Sebastian. He looked back, leaving the choice with her. Service, not exile, she said at last. You will rebuild the roads you helped poison with lies. 1 year under restitution crews. Full rations for your families protected by seal. Relief and shame crossed their faces together. They accepted. Alawan rose then and lifted the moon crown clasp, silver worked into a crescent threaded with frost rune. She fixed it at Luna's shoulder above the mark. Before pack and law, I name Luna Frostborn, recognized heir by blood and Valewood by bond, High Luna of the rebuilt Vale. The hall answered with fists to chests, one wave after another. That evening, lanterns lined the ruined eastern wing, now cleared of rubble. Doors stood open to newly whitewashed rooms where cots, ledgers, and work tables had been set in rows. Above the entry hung a plain cedar sign Luna had chosen herself, Sanctuary Guild. The pantry maid who had carried poisoned tea stood in the doorway twisting her apron, awaiting judgment. Luna stopped in front of her. I took coin, the woman whispered. I thought it was sleeping tincture. When I realized, I told no one. I am ready for sentence. You testify tomorrow, Luna said. Then you work here if you choose. No keys near medicines. Full watch until trust is rebuilt. The woman sobbed once and nodded. Sebastian came up behind Luna, close enough for warmth, his hand finding hers without pulling. In the courtyard beyond, children of laborers chased each other around stacked grain barrels, while wolves on watch pretended not to smile. No one in chains crossed that threshold. Not tonight. Not again. Under the first clear stars, Luna leaned into him and felt the settled bond hum, steady as breath. Home, she said, almost disbelieving. Sebastian pressed his marked throat to her marked shoulder. Yours, he said. Mine, she answered, and turned to kiss him softly while the keep lights burned into the dark like a promise kept.